Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show. This week, we're discussing managing operations and innovation with former Peloton SVP of Supply Chain, Erwin Hermans, plus other headlines for digital leaders from the world of enterprise technology. Each week, we discuss key issues and news at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI, the Institute for RPA and Artificial Intelligence, and the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members worldwide, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. Check us out at erpaai.com and deinetwork.com for resources, advice, and networking opportunities. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher, the author of The Rules of Persuasion, an educator at the University of Maryland in Georgetown, and former advisor at EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon to you. Good to be back.
Starting to feel like summer. And I'm enjoying some outdoorsy stuff now. And that's the good news. The bad news is Netflix finally caught up with me and I've got to start paying to use it. I can't use my in-laws Netflix anymore.
You're on the naughty list.
I got the warning. You can continue watching, but we're going to take your firstborn child if you don't change it soon, basically.
Oh, well, it had to happen sooner or later, right, Dan?
Mm-hmm. What else is catching your eye this week in the headlines?
Well, I look at the markets every day, and of course, it's been a pretty grim 24 hours. Yesterday, the market took a pretty strong beating. It looks like the same's happening today. Sort of started down, it's going to stay down. It's a memo to DC, right? If you want more of this, keep doing what you're doing. So we'll see kind of where it goes. Nobody likes uncertainty on Wall Street, so I think the debt crisis is playing itself out in the market. So we'll see where that goes.
Help me understand this, Carlos. They've been talking about recession for like a year, right? Yeah. And they keep saying, well, it's not here now, but it's going to be coming. And then they keep kicking that can down the road. If they know it's coming and they have like a year and a half's notice, is it really a recession at that point? Like, can't they just adjust? It's not uncertain if you know it's coming.
Well, I think at least if you look to the economists on Bloomberg and other places, right, from different firms, the consensus is, hey, the medicine still isn't bad enough, right? And so the Fed's going to have to put you into a mild recession in order for the inflation fever to break. It hasn't happened yet, and so the numbers tell them that's the only way you're going to break this and get it back down to where it needs to go to. So that still seems to be the consensus among the chief economists on Wall Street, from at least what I see every single day, is that we're still going to have a mild. The question is, can they land it, quote unquote, right softly and not make it too bad? But that's still the consensus on the street. That's what we're looking at in the second half of this year.
I guess the potential upside of that is I saw something in Bloomberg today that there's now more women working in the U.S. than at any point in recent history. 77.5% of women ages 25 to 54 are employed or actively seeking work. And they're attributing it to yes, remote work and a strong labor market, but also the high inflation and cost issues.
And you're seeing it more at the senior roles too, right? It seems that there is this sort of idea of, hey, let's rebalance a little bit on the gender side at the higher ends of the firms, and you're seeing there as well. And also, I think now we have more women in college, right? Higher education than men, which is the first. It happened a couple of years ago. So yeah, big changes.
Good changes. And the other thing that kind of jumped out at me is under the category of regulation and government kind of getting involved in technology, which we've talked a lot about in recent weeks. The Surgeon General came out this week, calling social media a profound risk to kids. We've touched upon this before. It's not new, but I think it's interesting that someone who is typically associated with traditional health, right, talking about technology.
Well, more and more mental health enters that conversation, right? As we know, forever it was kind of a taboo subject, and there's been a strong push to make mental health part of the health conversation. So I think it's a legitimate issue to raise, and any parent knows that there's something about social media and mobile devices, right? That's after a certain point, it becomes a negative element in in a child's life. The question is, what is that point, right? Who gets to decide? Well, it's fair warning.
And lots of AI use cases in the news this week. Amazon says they're producing a conversational AI search function for shopping, which we had the former head of Alexa privacy from Amazon on actually last week and then a few weeks ago. So it sounds like we either hit on something or it was already in the works. I won't take credit for it. I'm sure it's been in the works for a long time, but relevant to that conversation. And then just more and more of these use cases, right? Zoom has announced an investment in an AI startup to start putting large language models into their video conference platforms. Meta is unveiling an AI sandbox for AI-based advertising, generative AI tools, and there's even some physical robots that are entering the workforce, as it were. A company called Sanctuary AI revealed their humanoid robot that they say is designed for the workforce. And what was interesting about this is I saw this image of this robot. It's learning, unlike a lot of the hardware automotive industry and factory robots. It's actually learning as it goes, and they're using people in VR headsets to actually train these things.
Well, one of the things I'm looking for is, Mr. DeSantis, the governor, kicks off his campaign. Looks like tonight on Twitter. I think this will be the first presidential campaign that's coming up where we'll have fake video. Will play an important role in this. So I think as AI, we're now entering this age of sort of fake news stories. We'll go on to the scale, but I do think some of these technologies will be used to create, right, really just false messages. Right, so I would expect that to be the case coming up in the next year and a half. This could be a very interesting. It'll be the first AI included election, right, Dan?
Yeah.
Even at this early stage. So we'll see whether it plays out in news, in coverage, in video and images. So as a student of persuasion, I'm curious to see how these technologies are going to be integrated into the coming election.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's segue over to our main topic today, which is really kind of supply chain. Interesting. We talked last week about Amazon's former head of last mile delivery and logistics, but our guest today is Erwin Hermans. He's the COO of a startup, Givafifth, and the former SVP of Supply Chain from Peloton. Erwin, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
So before we jump in, maybe Erwin, just give a little bit of your background and how you got where you are today.
Very good. I guess I'll start where I am today. I joined a good friend who founded a company called Givafifth. It's a platform to help nonprofits run fundraisers. The company was founded on the premise that donors want to do good for organizations, but they prefer to receive something instead of just donating money. So our tagline is, it's good to give and receive. We have a Shopify store with curated products. They're Givafifth branded products. And when a nonprofit signs up on the platform, they receive a fundraiser code, which they share with their supporters. And then every time they make a purchase of a product on the site, 20%, hence the name Givafifth, of that purchase is raised for the nonprofit. So our goal is to become a giving brand, an ambitious goal, but we launched last month. So I'm excited to step into the new world of not just startup, but startup in a small business market. Prior to that, I did spend my last harrowing years at Peloton. Lived to tell. So excited to get into some of those discussions. Prior to that, I was in mostly operations and consulting roles over my 25 plus years now.
So, Erwin, let me go ahead and kick it off. First of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk about Peloton. And supply chain is difficult enough when everything is fine. You had the remarkable role of having to run a global operations at an incredibly fast growing company in the kind of public eye during the pandemic. Looking back at it now, a little bit of distance, what do you reflect on during that time, and any lessons you think you took away from that experience?
When I look back, it sort of feels like a surreal experience, and nothing that I've experienced in my 25 plus years in supply chain. When I look back of it, obviously I was at Peloton, which was a fast growing company, and when I look at that through that lens, you sort of look at what could we have done different, or what could any company have done different if we had known that this was happening. And presumably, if you had some lead time that it was happening, whether it was a year or 2 years, if someone told you this is going to happen, prepare your supply chain for it. What would you have done different? And I think the biggest challenge, at least being on the supply chain side, is that we can't defy the laws of physics. Products are made in Asia. They go on boats. If you're lucky in the electronics industry, they go on planes, but nonetheless, they enter a physical supply chain that got significantly disrupted to the extent that if you had to plan for it, you sort of go back to the people, process, technology. What would we have done differently? You look on the people side, everybody worked virtual. Not an area where you're growing a team. I was doubling my team size over 3 years. I doubled my team size each year in a virtual environment. Again, there was no script for that, so you're dealing with the people dimension. On the technology side, pretty advanced technologies out there with advanced planning systems, connected our supply base all the way through freight forwarders into our e-com platform where we were delivering to customers. And again, when you think of being connected in the old world, we weren't thinking about ocean liners being anchored at the port of LA and not having visibility to that particular piece of information. So ultimately, that missing piece of information was the most valuable part that ultimately could make everything go a lot more smooth, but it didn't, because that information wasn't available. And then on the process side, just like most startups, that's the last piece that you work on, and you go back to intuition when you're managing supply chain. And that's when you're growing fast, it's a challenging area to get down to documentation. Again, you're hiring at a rapid pace with processes that become more intuitive than really integrated.
Erwin, how much harder was it that you were, right, sort of talked about so much? You like Zoom and a few other companies, you were in the headlines all the time. And how did the external pressures or dynamics of the marketplace sort of impact the operational side of what you were doing every day?
It was just the real timeness. So we went March 13, still remember, 2020 is when we went out of the office. So we were in the office. We had an open floor plan. So, and the team was small. So there was real-time collaboration that were a quick question of when is that order coming in, or did we place this order? Now required either a call if it was more intense, which needed to be scheduled, or became on through Messenger and a communication where you couldn't necessarily get an immediate answer. So it made it hard not only because of the communication, but just how people got to know what the culture of the company was. And real time meant real time. It wasn't real time as in 30 seconds from now or 7 minutes from now. It was, no, I need to know that now. And when you're in person, that you can sort of be fairly unequivocal about it. You stand outside someone's desk or by someone's desk by a chair, and you wait for the answer, and you won't leave till you get the answer. In a virtual world, that's a lot harder. So at the pace that we were operating, that was a real hindrance. But then looking back, it's amazing what we did accomplish, given how we had to go virtual. So it was pretty surreal.
What surprised you most, Erwin, in that whole experience, either about the supply base or the marketplace or the role that you had?
Well, I always had a philosophy through my career that you can sort of be of two minds. Either you are an execution-oriented supply chain leader, where you say, I'm just going to be the best at executing my supply chain because I can't predict it. So whatever is going to happen to it, I'm just going to be the best prepared to react to it. And there's another school of thought that says, well, if I plan better, I don't need to be perfect at the execution side because I'm going to know far more in advance what is about to happen. And then my execution becomes a lot easier because I predicted what is going to happen. And what I learned was that no matter which school of thought you were from, you're dead in the water no matter what. Nobody could have predicted what happened. What I was the most surprised about is on the execution side, is as much as technology was helping us integrating our supply chain from visibility to purchase orders at vendors to shipments on ocean. Once it got to the last, and I was listening to your the show last week's show on last mile. Once it got to last mile, and our last mile literally started at the port. When a container, we knew exactly, up till then, we knew exactly when a container was going to hit a port, and we could plan a customer delivery from that date on forward through our last mile network. From the moment you miss that piece of information, because the container is sitting 5 miles out in the ocean, and you don't know when that ship is going to get there, all of a sudden you're flying blind, and all the integration that you have now you can't rely on anymore. It just made it hard to plan only, and I'm talking 2 or 3 weeks out, not months out.
Erwin, and I'll preface this by saying, easy for me to say as a consumer looking at, a lot of companies, right? I shared a bunch of times on the show issues I was having, with my cars during the pandemic and trying to get parts, to the extent that not only could the dealers not tell me when the part was going to arrive, they couldn't even tell me whether it had been manufactured yet, at certain points. But isn't part of the supply chain practice about resiliency, right? So you can't predict necessarily a global pandemic, but there's so-called kind of, I think they call them black swan events, where you anticipate a supply chain crisis, a shipment not coming in, a disruption in a particular region because of a conflict or what have you. I know you can't talk about specifics, but what do you think of as a supply chain practitioner? How do you create resiliency, or was this just not a predictable thing based on the cascading effect that it had?
Yeah, I think you almost have to look at it across different factors. The size of company that you are, if you're a startup versus being an established company. I'm sure if you go talk to the automotive challenges, which were more at the component level, than the challenges that my challenges or Peloton's challenges ended up being more on the last mile side, which again, that varies from industry to industry. The type company, certainly your larger companies, while their systems tend to be more convoluted because of the sheer size, they're better prepared for it because they likely will have already seen, maybe not a black swan event, but certainly have learned from the last crisis. For Peloton, this was the first crisis. So our crisis up till then had been growing faster than our infrastructure is able to support from a, again, people, process, technology perspective. So this was on top of the fact that there was such tremendous growth. I always said, from a systems perspective, we're one step behind the growth of the company. We just could not put the infrastructure in place fast enough to react to, and that's just the day-to-day operations, because every year or every quarter, growth can continue to happen. So the challenge, I think, for startups to be prepared for a black swan is a tough nut to crack, because you don't have time. You're too focused on growing the company to also think about, well, what infrastructure do I need to put in place for a black swan event? And once it happens, you react as best as you can. Again, for most companies, unfortunately, the demand dropped off, and you have a completely different problem managing payroll versus other companies that where growth continued to take off, or continued, or got accelerated even. Where again, at that point, there is no time to put infrastructure in place. It's firefighting till you get through it.
Hey, Erwin, what role in all of this did technology play for you? Did you find that the systems you had in place were adequate to the task, given everything that was going on, or did you, do you feel that when the crisis sort of hit, everything, as happens sometimes, right, sort of went back to manual, right? You kind of just make phone calls, you deal with things the best you can. What role did the technology you had to run Peloton?
Yeah, I think I'm going back sort of to separating planning and execution. On the execution side, I think we were actually in decent shape. We had connected our suppliers, we had connected our 3PLs. So we had decent visibility. Obviously, there's always exceptions, and data never flows the way you want it to flow. But in general, I think on the execution side, we were in decent shape. I think on the planning side which is where you start, right? When you start building a supply chain. When I joined, we were running on QuickBooks and Excel. So when you start building out your IT infrastructure, you start with, well, I gotta have visibility. I have to have some level of basic visibility before I can get advanced on the planning side, and that's where we started. So by the time COVID hit, on the planning side, we had some basic capabilities, but it was hard to look through the crystal ball that we didn't have as to how far out do I need to know where my next inflection point is going to be, where we could be in trouble, either on the upside where you run out of manufacturing capacity, or on the downside where there's a drop in demand and all of a sudden you have to worry about working capital or inventory that is sitting on a 3 to 4 month supply chain.
I'm curious, Erwin, I spent some time in the supply chain space last year, and working with a couple of providers of technology and that were catering to supply chain management. And my observation was that there was a very large disconnect between the capabilities of some of the newer startups and technology companies in the space. Some were AI centric. And the supply chain leaders' level of education or awareness of those capabilities. And so, and to the extent of which, we would identify problems, with the supply chain management that they had, the tech stack that they had. And there still seemed like a hesitation to bring in new technologies or do things differently, even though it was obvious that the current way of doing things wasn't working. I'm wondering what you think is the reason for that. Is that just a cultural thing in supply chain where you kind of work more off your gut than using technology, or do you see technology not being a big help?
Yeah, it's a good question and a tough one to answer. I can look at it through my lens. Obviously, Peloton was a great brand out there, so we certainly had our inbound of software companies that were pitching the next biggest thing. And in general, and I'll just speak from my personal belief and experience, I truly believe that you have to have some fundamental building blocks in place before you can sort of be ready for the advance. Sort of, if you think of this, the IT maturity curve, before you can get to a higher level of maturity, you have to be able to get your basic supply chain operations under control. And I think for startups in particular, as you're building infrastructure, it's great for an AI company to come in and say, hey, I could have predicted all this, and this is how we could have helped you. But ultimately, if we don't know what to do with that data, because the rest of the infrastructure or the rest of the supply chain that needs to react to that information isn't in place, it doesn't do you much good. So for startups, it's tough to jump to the sort of on the AI bandwagon when you don't have the infrastructure to take all the good that comes out of it and now start executing on it. So there is a basic level of building block building blocks in your supply chain visibility and planning that you need before you can get to maturity. I don't believe, and again, I might be old school, that you can jump to an advanced level of maturity without the building blocks.
Yeah, it was partially that, I think, but I'll tell you, even on the other side of the spectrum, so that may have been the case on the smaller side. On the bigger side, it was almost the opposite problem. It was large organizations who were just so siloed, where that the person that you would speak to had their own limited scope and only really cared about their limited scope, not the big holistic picture. And so, I struggle to even recommend to them, should we focus more on startups because they're more nimble and flexible and less bureaucratic, or should we focus on the larger enterprises because they've got a bigger problem? And, I struggle to figure out which one would be an easier implementation, because the traditional organizations had really antiquated technology, really antiquated systems. They were less on the, hey, gut feeling thing than the smaller guys were, but they had the problem of just being, huge silos, being like, hey, your that solution covers, A to Z. I only cover, B to C, right? And we've already invested in this tool and it doesn't really work that great, but we're 3 years and, millions and millions of dollars into it, so we're not going to change it.
And I think there are a couple other things too. One is it's making products, right? When I was a consultant, I had a chance to work at Apple, at Caterpillar, at Airbus. And you just get an appreciation for what complicated worlds the men and women who run these operations live in, right? To make a tire, pick a car, an airplane, submarine, whatever it is. So they naturally feel a tremendous amount of, I'd say, guardedness about those environments, and anyone who tries to enter into those spaces has a pretty high bar to get over. And I think one of the problems is that while somebody may know how to make software really well, and they may be a wonderful technologist, what do you know about making an airplane, right? Or what do you know about making a cell phone? So there's this chasm that exists, I think, between very, very smart technology people, software engineers, and the people in supply chain manufacturing who make these complex products. And that, at least sitting in the room when I was at Accenture or the places, watching the conversation between the software creator, right, the builders and the clients, that seemed to be always an issue of, do you understand what it takes to make a cell tower, right? I know you know how to make software, and I think you know what it takes to make a cell tower, right? But do you really know what it takes, or to make one of these machines work? And so,
yeah.
It's hard. I can think of just a few people who I came across who were phenomenal technologists, Erwin, and at the same time really understood how to make complex high-tech product. That's a small group of people.
And the challenge is when you talk about your large enterprise software, you're looking at 3+ year implementation cycles. So people shy away from that because they have the problems to solve today. And then if you flip it to the point solutions where you're solving a particular problem, even in a silo environment, you can't, as an IT executive, you can't let each organization or each silo operation solve for their own problem, because ultimately it does need to be integrated and it does need to be connected across multiple organizations, because they're all integrated. So I don't know, Daniel, what the answer would be. Is it easier to sell to the smaller organizations or smaller companies? The answer is probably yes. It's easier because you have fewer decision makers, but you have to be, I think, a lot more patient to make sure that the capabilities that you're putting in place are growing at the pace of the company and in the areas where that need is the strongest. Because there's just not enough bandwidth to take on large IT programs, and that's setting aside the challenges of change management. Because no matter what, not everybody is going to be on board. Again, it's smaller it's easier in a smaller company, but it's very real, because some people are technology averse or afraid of change, and that will never go away.
I think also there's this issue of, when things go wrong, they really go wrong. I remember one time my anesthesiologist told me my job is 99% boredom, 1% terror, right? And I think there's a little bit of that in supply chain management where you're kind of invisible until something goes wrong, and then you're fantastically visible. And so there is that sense of, look, everything, maybe it's not working in the best way, but it is working, right? We are putting product on the truck or whatever, or in the customer's hands. And do you comprehend what happens if something goes wrong? And are you prepared to deal with that? Because our world goes from difficult to you're really in the middle of very complicated worlds when these things happen. When they go wrong, like I said, I've been there. They go wrong in a big way.
Yeah.
Erwin, you said something just a minute ago that was familiar to me. I'll paraphrase. You were kind of talking about, hey, all of this new technology and innovation is great, but I've got a job to do today. It reminds me of speaking to executives, a number of years ago before the pandemic, when we were doing more events, when we did our first digital transformation event. And these terms, digital transformation and innovation and things are thrown around a lot, especially by kind of media, industry media guys like me. But I sense that exactly what I think the sentiment of what you said before about, it's not that they were resistant to technology per se, but there was just so much to do day to day that they didn't really have time to think 3 years into the future while the rest of us are sitting here doing that. Right. So I'm curious as to your sense of just, is there a desire for innovation in the supply chain space, or is it more kind of day-to-day operational thinking?
No, I absolutely think I absolutely believe that there's a desire. It's just the way the desire is managed or orchestrated is perhaps doesn't get enough attention when you think about having a 3-year roadmap, or it just sounds so corny at times when you talk about roadmaps, but just knowing what you want to build. I think you need leaders like that. You need people in the organization that have that plan, preferably written down somewhere. And then it's the execution to that plan, I think, is where the challenge comes in, where you need to recognize that you have an organization that's busy with day-to-day execution, and can't pull away. You don't have a bench. It's not like in large organizations you can pull a team of 30 people together in a new project because you're just picking one of 17 demand planners and one of 120 buyers into a focus group or into a project. And off you go. When you have a smaller organization, you don't have that bench. You don't have the luxury of pulling someone out of an operational job to go work on an IT project. So you have to orchestrate that a little better. And again, that's assuming that everybody's on board and that you have the right people in the organization that can even represent the functional group, because they could have joined 2 weeks ago, and that's the best person you have, but they don't necessarily know the operations just yet. So that's I think challenging in smaller companies, and I think there's a large appetite for technology, and then especially when you look at the younger generation of supply chain professionals, they grew up with technology much more than I did, so they're definitely hungry for it. But the knowing that the day-to-day has to happen becomes the bigger constraint.
Where do you think the biggest gap is? Is it more from a technology standpoint? Is it more supply side? Is it more demand side, or is it more in kind of the orchestration between the two?
I think the gap is on the demand side, but it's much harder than on the supply side. When I say much harder, you need a lot more predictable type solutions than you do on the supply side. Supply side is largely built around visibility, and managing your transactions, knowing where what is, what needs to go where, when. It's fairly transactional. On the planning side is when you talk about the black swan, it's helping to build infrastructure or tools that help you sort of look around the corner so that you know what possibly could be coming next, and having a few data points that help you with that. There's a lot of planning solutions out there. They tend to get either very too PhD-ish, if you will, where you put the best guys in the room, they put the best tool out there, you put it in the hands of a demand planner who's not a PhD, it becomes too complicated, or it becomes black box where you as a demand planner, it's like, just trust it. The system is going to spit out a number, and just go with that. And most people don't trust it yet, because all of us have been around data enough to know that that there's a lot to be desired when it comes to. And I'm not talking about the sort of from the pure data harmonization and cleansing perspective. Just you get out of it what you put into it type challenge.
Hey, Erwin, a minute ago you brought up people, and I want to talk about the human aspect to this, right? Again, you're kind of in this very complicated role. You've got this team you're trying to grow. What was it like for you, just as a leader, as a person, with you, your family, and the stress of this environment, and any leadership lessons or things you say, oh, I wish I would have done this differently, or I thought I did this well from that time?
I was very fortunate at Peloton during COVID that the Peloton culture sort of lifted everyone up, and it was a great time to be at that. So people really wanted to be there. People really associated with the brand. I think to the person, I can say for my team that they were not there for a job. They really were there because one, we're doing good. They're learning fast in a company that really cared about people. So I really believe that I had a phenomenal team that was not the 9-to-5 type. This was, and we were firing on all cylinders. Burnout was certainly a question or an issue that became much more prevalent as COVID continued on. So I think from a talent perspective, we were able to attract the best and brightest. I think the leadership part became hard going virtual. And it became hard because you didn't have that opportunity as a leader to walk the halls or do the proverbial management by walking around, where you're growing a team. And I ended up with 60% of the team that I'd never met because it was all virtual. So you're losing that ability to really connect with people on a personal level. Anything professional, like I said, it helps to have the best talent that's in it to win it, so to speak. There was never any challenges around getting done what needed to get done. It was more about helping people grow in their careers, thinking about how we as leaders can help them not just be the best that they can be at the role, but also grow in the company. And that there was no time for it, first of all, and second of all, doing that virtually makes it more challenging.
Was there anything you did personally, Erwin? Last question on this topic, to kind of keep you level during that whole stressful time?
No, actually, I failed miserably. My gray hair count doubled, and I won't bring my wife into the discussion, but the family can tell you that I clearly failed in all respects of trying to find any balance throughout that period.
Well, on that maybe not so positive note, let's switch to Givafifth and talk about, you could have done lots of things right after Peloton, stayed in a corporate role, done venture, a lot of things. You and I went to for a while. We talked about this. Why Givafifth?
Yeah, to me, it's and I don't get very philosophical. I am from Belgium originally. Feel like I don't really get truly philosophical, but I sort of looked at the three phases of your life, where the first phase of your life you learn. You're a child, you learn. The second phase of your life you work because you have to provide for your family. And then the third phase, you give back. And I felt that in my entire career that I had not done enough of that. That it was because I've always been in fairly fast-paced environments, that I have always had this nagging feeling that my contribution to the world needed to be bigger than my day job, so to speak. And with Givafifth, I was very fortunate to have a great friend, longtime friend, who right as I left Peloton, he had already founded this company Givafifth, and I was sort of and he's a marketeer, so he's on the marketing side of the industry, if you will. And I felt with me having an operations brain that was sort of a good yin-yang situation where I could build something to help companies or to help nonprofits raise funds. And it had a supply chain component to it because we have products in a warehouse that need to be planned. It was think about when you set up a supply chain from scratch with no revenue and a handful of products. It was quite an exciting time to not have to worry about when the next ship comes off anchor, but truly building out something, an infrastructure for a business that helps people in the end.
What's the biggest challenge? Or you went from, okay, Peloton's not a huge company, but bigger than a startup, right? Any unique challenges from a innovation or a supply chain standpoint that you're dealing with for the first time?
It's again predictability. The putting the infrastructure together on visibility, finding vendors, putting product in a warehouse, having visibility to that. Granted, it's all in Excel right now because we are just getting started. But not knowing, I mean, as simple as Peloton was simple. When I joined the company, we only had a bike, and at the time, I remember telling friends, it's a one SKU company. How hard can it be to manage that supply chain? I sort of had to eat those words.
You paid for that, yeah. You paid for that comment.
So now I'm more on the sort of consumer goods side, where you have lots of SKUs and the predictability of the cadence of orders coming in, and just managing growth again is it's a little bit more. Because you're dealing with nonprofit organizations that don't operate like your typical organization, so there's definitely a lag between signing up to run a fundraiser and then the actual going after your constituents or your supporters and encouraging them to go to the site so that they can buy products that ultimately raise funds. So it's a different environment. Slower paced, if I can say, in that the small business supply chain, if you will, isn't as electronically connected. So I remember going into selecting a warehousing partner or a 3PL partner, and I had my playbook of here's the SLAs that I want to, at my 7-page questionnaire, and here are the SLAs that I want to put in a contract. And it was basically, no, we don't do SLAs. That's not how we operate. We take your order and ship it out the door.
Take it or leave it, little guy. Right?
Exactly. So it's a different dynamic, but I'm fortunate that with my experience, I feel that I can really help the company put the operational infrastructure in place to grow.
Yeah, I have a buddy who's a former procurement executive from a large investment bank, and he maybe a year or two ago got into a startup, and it was a different world. I said, "Yo, the first time you had to pull your wallet and your credit card out, right? You never had to do that before."
Yeah, exactly. But it's super exciting to see working with nonprofits. They have their challenges. As obviously, the current economic situation isn't helping nonprofits. But when you look at the challenges they have to raise funds and the need for funds, so it's great to see their energy. Again, they're all nonprofits, so nobody's in the nonprofit space to make to get rich. So there's just a ton of good people out there that want to do good things, and it's great to be surrounded by them.
Great. So before we break, last question, Erwin. What do you speaking of a single SKU business? What do you think of Peloton's new update around a free and multiple tiers?
I think reaching and again, this is just me speaking as a consumer.
Individual,
right now.
Yeah.
I am a proud owner of a bike and tread, and it's amazing what the company has built. I think broadening the appeal of the company and being able to touch more people, it was super exciting to hear not just the physical wellness, but the mental wellness that customers brought to, and obviously these days with Facebook and social media, there's a lot of chatter out there. But when I first joined, I had just never worked for a company where you could feel so directly connected to your customer. Yeah, and we were in supply chain, so obviously we were delivering the bike and the tread, so we know how excited people were to receive them. But as I got through the years, it was exciting to hear members express what Peloton had done for their lives, both on physical, whether it's getting healthier from a physical perspective, but more and more, and especially during COVID, from a mental perspective, just having that escape to work out. It's not an easy category, right? It's a lot easier to get a Netflix membership and sit on a couch than it is to get a Peloton membership and actually have to do something. So, but I think the whole being health conscious, being physically and mentally healthy with this new structure, I think there's a far bigger reach, perhaps than there was in the past pricing structures, that I think will just increasing the number of people that you can touch is always a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few like standout stories in the pandemic of brands that really changed people's thinking about how the world would work. Zoom is one, but Peloton is definitely there, right? I think it actually launched an entire industry of virtual gym and workout from home again in a way that really wasn't there before. So amazing story. Well,
yeah, and it's the mission of the company was there before COVID, obviously, right? So Peloton didn't grow out of COVID; it just happened to go into COVID with the right business model. So you do think back, if COVID hadn't happened, what that journey would have looked like. I do believe that our supply chain maturity got accelerated because we didn't have a choice. You certainly learn where your gaps are when you go through a crisis like that. On the flip side, it also forced us to hurry up to grow up way faster than the organization was ready to grow up. So you had to take the good with the bad.
Yep.
Well, we'll wait for the book to come out. About your time there. It'll be a fascinating read. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. It's great having you here.
Anytime.
Thanks, Erwin.
Thank you, guys.
So Carlos, before we jump, speaking of books, how's your book going? It's launching this summer now, yes?
August 3rd is it's some pre-order now, right? Available on August 3rd. And so I think the last time that I had auditioned to read the book, because Recorded Books is doing the audiobook, and I was selected for that, incredibly. I'm not sure why, but
you had to audition to read your own book?
I had to audition to read my own book, that's right. And I guess I passed the audition. So
I should hope so.
Well, I would have thought a professional voice over person would have been a better choice, but I guess there's something about having the person who wrote the book read the book, I suppose. So going into the studio next coming weeks to record it takes about a week, I would think, to record the whole thing. So that'll be a first experience for me.
I'll tell you what, my two favorite books that I've read most recently through Audible, were where the author was the speaker. And I found that that's 100% better than, not because of the voice quality. I get the reason for the voice people, but, because these are the people that are the most passionate about the topic. They know what they're talking about. And in one of them, the guy actually stops because things have changed in the short time from when he wrote the book to when he's recording this. So he actually stops and kind of goes off on a tangent and updates things. And you feel like you're having a conversation more than just having someone read something to you.
There are a couple of interesting issues because the book has, I think, just about 40 QR codes in it. So because I use a lot of examples from media and art and all the things, I asked if they could put QR codes whenever I talk about something that's available on the web. And so that turned out to be an interesting project, and credit to Post Hill Press for doing that, because the book is unique in that you can just take out your phone and scan what I'm talking about. So that'll be interesting when we get to that part, because there is a lot of connectivity to things that are out there, right? And I guess as we do the narration, we'll think about, okay, how do I explain something that for the reader has the advantage of being able just to go ahead and go to YouTube and see Kevin Costner speak, for example. So there'll be some interesting aspects. Maybe that's, in one sense, it is better for me because I understand what's coming up and maybe can add a little tweak here and there as we record the narration. So looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun.
Well, they don't have to wait because you've been nice enough to offer a masterclass in the rules of persuasion, one-on-one sessions with you over the next few weeks. And I think we might even, if anybody watching is interested in that, send me a note and we're going to give you a discount code. But join the masterclass. It's actually taught by Carlos, which is unique.
It's a lot of fun because the book was born out of 2 years of coaching, interesting enough, with nonprofit leaders. That's where the idea for the book kind of came from, right? So there's a whole process that I've taken leaders through to understand what eventually became all the concepts in the book. So it's a fun class, right? We look at a lot of film, because they find that's the easiest thing to use to explain concepts to people these days. It's kind of lingua franca movies for everyone. So it'll be a chance to kind of go behind the scenes into a lot of the concepts that are at play in the book. And especially, and we were just doing the PR discussion for the book, and the PR person, the publisher, said to me, how do you feel about going on political shit, a political outlet, right? And I said, I have no issue with this. The book is neutral, I hope. And especially going into an election season, right? Persuasion isn't, the attempts to persuade us all will be in full bloom the next year and a half. So I actually think it's kind of nice timing that the book comes out in August, just as we go off a year-long presidential season, right? And we'll be watching to see how, with what skill or the lack thereof, the candidates present their messages kind of be over the course of the next 12 months or so.
Great. Well, check it out, network.irpaai.com. And as always, we'll be back next Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific.
Look forward to it, Dan. See you next week.
Take care, everybody. Have a good week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.